Thank you to Richard for inviting me to share my work with you. I get many invitations from around the world as gambling is exploding globally. And I can't possibly respond to all of them, but I was especially moved by Richard's invitation because I appreciate the fact that he has deep insider knowledge of the gambling industry. I see him as a fellow expert, and I'd like to help out with the conversation that is unfolding now in the Netherlands. So as I understand it, expanded gambling that's happening over there right now, especially in 2021 to the online market. That's what's at stake here, prompting this conversation, right? As gambling moves online, opens to new players in the industry and new markets, right? Because this is happening during the pandemic, which may have been perfect timing from a revenue perspective because people are at home and they are bored and they are anxious and they are looking for distraction. But just as it's a perfect timing for revenue, it's also for those very same reasons, perfect timing for the development of problem gambling. And I'll say again, especially among young people who are familiar with an online format. So I'm going to share my screen and take you through just a few images from my own work. And I don't speak Dutch, but I did pick up on lots of phrases from Richard's introduction. Thank you for that, Richard. So some of this will review the ideas that he has already put out there for you to think about. And this is from my research over 2 decades in Las Vegas. So I guess I'll start by saying that this holds in Europe, this holds in the United States, in our cultural imagination. The most intense, problematic forms of gambling in need of regulation and attention and serious concern continue to be these more traditional forms of gambling, the green felt tables, right? These are associated with intrigue and crime and very high stakes, right? But in fact, if you look at the research that has been produced since the 1980s on, it's actually slot machines, which are the most intensive form of gambling. But slot machines, and I'd say many of these new online forms of gambling with the lights and the colors and the little animated characters, these are so often misperceived. And they're misperceived by legislators, by journalists, and certainly by us, right, by the public, as being a very light form of gambling. And I think this is because we see these forms of gambling that are technologically mediated as having very low stakes. Here in the United States, the most high earning machines are penny slots, just 1 penny you can play. So they're seen as having low stakes. They're seen as very easy to play. You don't need to be a real gambler to play these, right? Anyone can play these. They have, especially in the United States, a historical popularity with women, with cute little old ladies, retired people, and they look a lot like youth arcade gambling, right? Going back to the 1980s. You can imagine a big arcade with kids there, playing Miss Pac-Man. And it's very similar looking to a lot of what we see on casino floors and online with these machine games. But in fact, as I discuss at length in the book Richard told you about, which was published exactly a decade ago, 10 years ago, before this explosion of online gambling. In fact, gambling devices, these technologies, and here you see on the cover of my book, an older format slot machine, right? That actually had 3 reels and you could pull the handle on the one-armed bandit. These forms of gambling are considered, not just by me, but by many researchers, as being the most potent, intensive form of gambling that there is. And I will just say a few words in a moment about why that is. Why are they the most potent? But I guess I wanted to say first that often the question that gets asked in this conversation that we are having here and you're having as a society around gambling technology, the question that gets asked is, does the problem stem from inside the device, or does it stem from inside the gambler? So I want to say up front, I think this is the wrong way to frame this question. Any good addiction researcher knows that you cannot have an addiction unless you have two sides, right? Addiction is a relationship, and it develops between an object or a substance and a subject. And it's never a question of inside, right? Is it inside the person? Is it inside the product? It's always a question of between. It's always a question of the relationship. And the majority of the research that has been funded by the industry, especially, puts the source of the problem on the person. The industry, the gambling industry, especially in the United States, they love to fund, to appear that they are funding research on the problem, but the kind of research they fund is on the genetics, the personal histories, the neurochemistry, the social factors in the background of a person, right, that might lead them to become addicted. And all of this research, it's very interesting. I have nothing against that kind of research, but it's not balanced out by looking at the other side of the relationship. What does the technology bring to the relationship? How does it draw out addictive tendencies and perhaps amplify them? So just to be clear, I absolutely believe some people come into the world more vulnerable to addiction of any kind. But by the same token, I also think it's very clear that some substances, if you want to talk about heroin or crack cocaine, and also some activities, some technologies that are highly designed and formatted, they also are more likely to addict people. So we have to include in our conversation both sides. Sometimes this is done in a very sensationalistic way, right? Here are just some quotes of what slot machines, for example, have been called by journalists who really want to grab you and be sensationalistic. And this is, the crack cocaine of gambling, electronic morphine. Slot machines have been called the most virulent strain of gambling in the history of man. Video gambling is the addiction delivery device. We hear this a lot. And although there is a strong sensationalism happening here, I'd also like to say that from spending 25 years studying this stuff and living in Las Vegas and talking to designers of machines as well as addicts, there is some empirical truth to these statements. So why is that? What is the holding power of this technology? What makes it different than a card game in your family room on the weekend with friends? So studies, mine included, have found that people who play these games repeatedly, so these are known in the US gambling industry as repeat players. So repeat players will become addicted 3 to 4 times more quickly. They become addicted in 1 year instead of 3.5 years than people who are participating in traditional forms of gambling, like card games or traditional sports betting, not the new sports betting, but sports betting where you will go to a racetrack, right? The particular addictiveness of the modern slot machine has to do with a few factors. So if we want to just summarize, it's solitary, right? It's just a person and a screen. There's no other people to introduce social stopping cues or pace it differently. It's just you and the machine. It's rapid. You get immediate feedback, which is very confirming and pulls you in to this kind of machine zone that gamblers talk about. It's continuous wagering, right? Unlike other kinds of games, it doesn't have an end. It doesn't have a clear stopping point. Gamblers describe, as I think Richard already spoke a little bit about, this is their term, the zone, the machine zone particularly. They describe it as a trance-like state where they're so focused on playing the game in this sort of solitary, rapid, continuous feedback that they're getting. The effect is that all of their daily worries, their concerns, their anxieties, even a sense of their own physical body can fall away when they're playing. So, at the extreme end of this experience, some gambling addicts will sit for whole weekends in a kind of trance at the machine. One gambler told me he forgets the name of his child when he is playing. So, this form of gambling that is about escaping into a zone, it really contradicts what I showed you in that first slide, which is a traditional game where people are sitting up in their seats and they're engaged in a very intense social interaction. It's like the existential stakes are very high. This is a different kind of gambling. This is a kind of gambling that isn't driven so much by risk and suspense or even volatility. This is a form of gambling that is about feeling numb. And the slot machine is a very dependable mechanism for getting that kind of zone away from life. I should say that this is a form of gambling that in the United States is very associated with women who traditionally didn't play the other kinds of gambling. But I'm not sure there's anything inherently female about this kind of gambling. More and more men are playing it. And if you look at other countries, the very same games that 50-year-old women play in the United States are being played by 23-year-old men. So I'm not sure we can essentialize on gender. I'll just say one more a quote from a gambler to give you a sense of this kind of zone that they go into. One gambler told me, "Sometimes I get into such a rhythm on the machine that I would mistakenly discard winning hands. It was more about keeping the pace than making the right decisions." So again, this is very contrary to how most people think about compulsive gambling. People think, people must be playing to win. They must be stupid, right? They must have missed the lesson in high school about in school about probability, right? But actually winning really falls away as a goal when you get caught into this kind of gambling. Winning may be part of the initial hook. And you see this in the aggressive marketing that casinos do. And you see this in the new wave of online gambling and sports betting online, right? There's this aggressive marketing and there's lots of flashy ads about how you could win. And certainly that's part of the initial hook. But once you get hooked in, what I like to call the hold, what holds you there is quite different. It's not so much about winning, it's more about this zone that I am talking about. And I think the industry, I know that the gambling industry is very aware of this. Here's a quote on the screen. "Our best customers are not interested in entertainment. They want to be totally absorbed, get into a rhythm." So I think there is an awareness on the design side, on the industry side, that this is a form of escape gambling. And I'll just say one more thing. It took me a while to realize this. I had to listen to many gamblers telling me how sometimes they would become disappointed when they won because, and I would say, tell me more about that. What do you mean? Aren't you trying to win? And they said, well, when I win, the music plays and the machine freezes and stops and people look at me. Suddenly they're dropped back into the world and their zone is interrupted. And they say, I feel very irritated. I just want to get back into the zone. So the industry has been designing ways to allow gamblers, even if they win a big jackpot, they can just keep clicking, they can override the win. So I think that's very telling about this particular form of gambling. I heard Richard use the phrase time on device. So if the gamblers call this form of gambling, the machine zone, the industry equivalent is this phrase time on device. And this is the way that most money in the gambling industry is made. It's made on a profiting from the volume of play, often with very small stakes, instead of profiting on big wins and traditional forms of gambling. So the whole aim of design is to get players to gamble more rapidly, more continuously for longer periods of time. You want to keep them in this zone where they are not making rational decisions. And I don't have time today to talk about all the techniques that they use to do that. But some of the ways they do that is audio visual, right? The way they pixelate the screens, the way they use sound. There's a whole science to this. The most important things lie behind the screen in the math of the machine. So here you see some techniques. You have the ergonomics, you have bill acceptors, so you don't have to keep stopping to put in money. And when we talk about online gambling, it's just hooked right into your credit card or the credit that you have uploaded. So you don't have to stop and think about the fact that you are making decisions each time to keep playing. You are just connected to this financial source, right? But the most important innovations are behind the screen. It's the things we don't see. It is the mathematical algorithms that are running in these machines. One designer told me the math is what will make players stay. So this means when we talk about math, anyone who has studied behaviorist psychology like B.F. Skinner, you might remember Skinner boxes, where in the 1950s and 60s, using animals like pigeons or rats, B.F. Skinner and his colleagues figured out which was the most compelling reinforcement schedule or reward schedule. So a Skinner box is very much like a slot machine. In fact, B.F. Skinner often used the example of a slot machine to illustrate to people what a Skinner box was. It even looks like a slot machine. You've got an animal in a box, and there's lights and there's levers. And he learned that if you have a predictable reinforcement schedule, like every 10 pulls or pecks with your beak, if you're a pigeon, is going to produce a reward, a piece of food. Then you'll peck 10 times, and then you'll go away and maybe socialize with the other pigeons, have some water. But if you never know when the food is coming, the reward, and you never know how much it will be, that aspect of uncertainty will keep you pecking. And so it's very much the same here, right? Part of being human is to be very compelled by the puzzle and the uncertainty, and you get caught up in just, and the next one, and the next one. Essentially, what today's modern gambling technology, online and offline, what it does is it takes this formula of random rewards from behaviorist psychology, and it intensifies it with the algorithms, with the audio visuals, with the sounds, etc. So you end up with games like this, where you are dividing your bet into many, many different lines. These are currently the highest earning games that we have. You can put in 100 coins and bet on 100 different lines. So it's a sort of form of gambling that reduces your risk in a weird way, because every time you gamble, you might get a little bit back. And every time you get a little bit back, you're actually losing, but you get the reinforcement of a win. Ding, 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 ding. You know, you just put in 50, you got 40 back. That means you lost 10. Ding, 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 ding. It feels like you won. So as you're winning, as you are steadily losing, you feel as if you're just sitting there, ding, 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 and winning the whole time. So this is known as false wins. And this happens online, this happens offline. So just to wrap up, this all brings me back to my earlier comments about the importance of understanding addiction as a relationship. You cannot adequately understand what is going on with problem gambling or addiction to gambling if you just look at problem gamblers, right? You have to also understand that this is a story of problem machines. I don't mean to suggest in every case that the gambling industry is this, sinister, evil empire, and they're sitting around scheming like, how can we addict people? That's actually not accurate. It's actually a more difficult problem than that, because it's not about individual bad actors. It's about the fact that we've got this contemporary form of capitalism where you are expected to do everything to increase your bottom line, increase revenue. So like any other business, this industry does sit around and they do think up every possible way that they could increase their revenue, increase their bottom line. That is not actually shouldn't be surprising to anyone or scandalous. This is the society and the values that we all here endorse, right? So there's an open and free discussion of how can we keep our customers playing longer, playing faster, playing more. And this is where the problem comes in, because longer, faster, and more, and increased bottom line actually matches up in many cases with addiction. You are treating every customer as someone who will potentially stay longer, gamble more. And so the industry in our particular political economic times has hit upon this formula that's very compelling. And whether or not it's their intention, these problems are rising to the surface. And we see those problems exploding as we move online. I have been doing a lot of interviews with journalists here in the United States in the past weeks and months on the explosion, for instance, of sports betting, which basically takes a traditional form of gambling where you would bet on one event, you would bet on the outcome of the event, right? Who won the game? What was the points? That's what you're betting on. And you have to wait the whole game to get there. Now it's turned that into a slot machine, basically, because you go online and you're betting for the whole game. If you're at a soccer game, you're betting on what's going to happen next and this and that. And it turns into a slot machine. And when you come to the end of the game, you don't have to stop. It's no longer determined by the actual game in real life. You can keep gambling on table tennis in Belgium or ping pong in Poland. So it's sort of turning the whole internet into a big slot machine. So I am going to, with this gesture at the online markets and the dangers this brings to new markets, to young people, I think I will stop and wish you the best for the rest of your conference. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Natasha, for your explanation and your contribution. Hope to see you one day in real life, so we have a date.
Thank you, Richard.
Bye.
For the conference.
Het loopt allemaal mooi uit zo. Zijn er nog vragen, mensen die nog iets willen weten? Ik kan ook niet alles verklaren van wat zij zegt, maar... Sorry, ik kom een beetje neer op wat ik net zeg. De industrie, vooral in Amerika, nog maar even benadrukt, zet daar heel zwaar op in. Ze zijn ook allemaal concurrenten van elkaar. Dus als ze elkaar vliegen af kunnen vangen, dan zullen ze het niet laten. En zij komt ook inderdaad over het sportsbetting. Ik heb ook wel uitslagen ingevuld, maar je kan nu ook op een wedstrijd. Die krijgt de eerste gele kaart, die maakt de eerste overtreding, die krijgt de eerste corner. Oh, sorry, ik dacht dat ik zo ook te staan was. Maar ik heb dus ook wel op wedstrijden gespeeld. Vroeger was het inderdaad de uitslag, hè, de toto. Ik ken nog Frits van Toerenhout, die zei altijd 0-0. En dan had ik weer een 3'tje in moeten vullen. Nu kun je dus inderdaad de uitslag, maar je kunt zeggen wie krijgt de eerste gele kaart, wie maakt de eerste overtreding, wie schopt het eerste bal het stadion uit. Daar zijn gewoon weddenschappen op. En ja, dan kom je over aan matchfixing. Ik kan me voorstellen dat een speler denkt van, ik zal erover zorgen dat ik de eerste gele kaart krijg. En krijgt daar dan ook voor betaald vanuit dat bedkantoor. Ze bleef nog een beetje in het verleden hangen. Daar ben ik ook wel blij mee, want als zij zegt over waar ze nu mee bezig is, dus die clickbait industry, waar ook in haar ogen ook de gokindustrie mee bezig is, dan wordt het een heel erg technisch verhaal. Maar het komt dus hierop neer, vooral in Amerika, die wat oudere machines, de rolmachines nog in principe, zijn in haar ogen het meest verslavend, nog steeds. Gewoon het ritme waar mensen komen, die trance waar ze in willen komen en waar ze eigenlijk al helemaal niet uit willen komen. Dus dat is een gevaar. En nogmaals, ik heb dus ook in een casino gewerkt, wel veel bij tafel spelen. Daar begonnen ze ook